thanks so much for joining us on our Arise Church YouTube channel. We exist so that you can experience God, and we hope you do experience His presence and His power through this message. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to us on Instagram at My Arise Church and find us on YouTube at the same handle, My Arise Church.
All right, I just got a few minutes to be able to speak today. I love child dedications, always so much fun. I was thinking back to my childhood when I was a little boy, things that I just loved, and one of those were professional athletes. If you know our church at all, I got a million examples from sports, and when I was a kid, I remember the first athlete I grew up watching was Walter Payton. Walter Payton. I'm not a Chicago Bears fan. You guys made way too much noise a couple weeks ago, and then you got your butts kicked by the Bucks. Or at least your fans are loud. But I loved watching Walter Payton's sweetness run. I got a Walter Payton jersey because I'm a fan of him, not the Bears. But and then Dan Marino stole my heart as a quarterback, watching Danny Boy throw dimes down in Miami as a child. Because we didn't really have any quarterback ever in my childhood for the Bucks, but they had Danny Dimes. Joe Montana to Jerry Rice, love those. And then as a Florida State fan, watching Deion before he was Coach Prime, when he was Neon Deion Primetime Sanders for Florida State, and then Atlanta, watching him. And these are these iconic people, these legends of sports that I grew up watching, that I loved to watch, that I looked at, and I'm like, man, I want to be like that someday, so to speak. And they touched me from a different perspective. I was just watching. We went to the Bucks game last Monday night. Bob Fedor, thank you if you're watching or here, gave us tickets, and so we were at the Bucks game last Monday night. And Rondé Barber is getting brought into the Hall of Fame this year, and so they have a Hall of Fame ring ceremony. I didn't even know that was a thing, but they had it at the halftime show for Rondé Barber at the Raymond James Stadium, and I'm thinking back to Rondé Barber's time, and I was thinking he is legendary. In fact, he said a word or a little phrase in his little halftime speech, a little 3 or 4 minute speech. He said, "I am honored to be your legend." I'm like, that's really cool. And I was thinking about the legend that's brought forth by Rondé Barber, and I was thinking about this play, and I just got to throw it out there because I'm sick of Philadelphia Eagles kicking our butt on Monday night. And going back to the NFC Championship in 2002, and Philadelphia, when Donovan McNabb are driving down the field, and it looks like they could score and possibly, have some momentum and maybe turn the game around, and then this play happens with Rondé Barber.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. All the way, untouched, down the field. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Come on, y'all remember that play? Where are my Bucs fans at? That's the play that got us to the Super Bowl, that we eventually won our first Super Bowl. Why? Rondé Barber, the legend. And he said, "I am honored to be your legend." Legends are funny because legends in general are people that you look up to but you don't actually know. I just put a whole bunch of lists up there. Walter Payton, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Deion Sanders. I've never met any of those people. I watched them from a distance. I celebrated their wins because their wins were my wins. I celebrated who they were, what they did, but I didn't know them personally, and I never met one of them. I met Rondé for a 30-second conversation one time. He was like 2 people behind me voting. He was in the voting line, and I'm like, that's Rondé Barber. So I met Rondé one time, but I don't know Rondé Barber. I don't know anything about him. And that's kind of the way that legends are. Legends are awesome to some degree. You look up to them, you praise them, but there's no closeness to them. You don't know them. Meanwhile, you have people of legacy. Legacy people are very different because oftentimes legacy people are not legendary. Oftentimes, they're not known by the world. They're not famous. You're not putting their pictures up on a PowerPoint like this morning. They're not famous. They're not well known, but they impact your life in a profound way. I think of people like my Aunt Avis, who is with the Lord now, and you don't know my Aunt Avis, but her impact on me when I was a little boy was extraordinary in the way that she cared for me and did different things with me as I would spend a lot of time at her house. And I think of Mrs. Robinson. She was my 2nd grade teacher, and she was that white-haired old lady with fluffy fingers. Y'all know that teacher? We all had that teacher at some point. And she was like the most gentle, sweet. In all of my elementary school, the only teacher I remember was Miss Robinson because she was so sweet, so nice. And then I heard that song, "Hey, Mrs. Robertson, whatever." And I would sing her that song, and she always liked that. And she was like the sweetest thing. And I think of a Royal Ranger commander I had by the name of Tom and how he affected my life when I was a little boy. And none of those people are going to be on the screens. They're not legendary people, but yet they impacted me. They are people of legacy. Legacy is very different than being legendary. And throughout this series, this creator series, we're asking creator because there's certain things that you just won't get the right information from Google. You have to go to your creator. And each week we've looked at different things. We started out with what is the meaning of, we started out with what is your identity? Who am I? That is a fundamental question. If you don't get that one right, you will get all the other answers wrong to every other question in life, by and large. If you didn't see that, make sure you go back to that first part of the series. Who am I? It's the question of your identity. And then we asked the question of purpose. Why am I here? And we tried to answer that in a different way than what you might have even expected. And if you don't get the identity question, you'll never get the purpose question. And then out of the purpose question, you could get the meaning question. What is the meaning of life, right? And so we talked about the meaning of life. And some of you in this service, we never even got to that because God was moving so much. Make sure you go back and watch it online. And then this week is a little bit unique because the first three questions, while they touch everybody, they sort of cater to a younger crowd in general. Who am I? The identity question. If you're 60, still wrestling with your identity, you're struggling. Like, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's where you're at. But you're probably wrestling with it more when you're younger than when you're older. But it's for everybody. Today is actually kind of the polar opposite of that. This is for everybody, but you're going to wrestle with this more when you get older. And it's the question of how will I be remembered? It's the question of legacy. Not being legendary, but creating a legacy. And there's a big difference between those two. With legends, we talk about what a legend did. When it comes to legacy, we talk about who they were. Legends are frequently about a heroic event or a one-time, once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing that they do, and you celebrate it forever. Rondé Barber picking the ball off to go to the Super Bowl. But legacy is not about heroic events. It's about heroic lives. Legacy is about something that takes a lifetime. And too many people today, I'm afraid, are more caught up with being a legend than leaving a legacy. We more want to climb the corporate ladder, have our success, earn this degree, have this title, get this thing that makes us legendary so people will talk about how great we are. And we're more concerned with becoming a legend than actually passing off a legacy, to the degree that we're actually creating identity problems and meaning problems and purpose problems in a younger generation because we are trying to make a name for ourselves rather than actually pick up the younger generation and help them understand who they are. And we haven't got to the place that we start to realize that our life is not about us. Our life is actually about them. That all we are has to be selfless. Because selfishness and significance cannot go together. This is important. Because sometimes we get so selfish and we're trying to make a name for ourselves. And if you want to truly be significant and pass something on to somebody else, you have to make it not about you and make it about them. And that's the difference between being a legend and being a legacy type person. Legends focus on themselves. They're kind of inward focused, while people of legacy focus on others. They're outward focused. Malcolm Forbes says people who matter the most are the ones that realize everyone else does too. They do too. And so that's why in our church we use the word legacy quite a bit. So we have legacy giving and we have legacy Sundays. And these are days where selfishness cannot exist in our setting if we're going to leave a legacy, because we're actually going to pour out of us into others to help people around the world. This is what Pastor Prothios does to a large degree and oversees in our church, is legacy ministries where we're investing in others, because legacy is not about what we get. Legacy is about what we give. And if we get caught up in what we get, we're never going to leave a legacy. You might become a legend. People might tell stories about you, but you're not really passing anything off to them. Now, in the Bible, there's lots of great legacy. Moses was a legendary leader. He is arguably the greatest leader in all of the Bible. He led 1 million people out of bondage. He stood up to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." He has this burning bush encounter with God. He literally is the one who would talk to God face to face. We're going to see this in a few moments. He is legendary. Legendary. But yet you see that that's not okay that he's just going to do legendary things, that he needs to be a person of legacy. Because if he's only legendary, when he's not on the scene, everything will go crazy. Which you do realize every time Moses was not there during his time period, everything would go crazy. He goes up on the mountain, comes back, as we'll see in a moment, and everything's going crazy. You see this kind of personality happening all the time. So Moses has to switch from just being successful and being the one that everybody wants to touch the hem of his garment, being Joe Montana, being Michael Jordan, being LeBron James. He has to switch from that to create a legacy to say, I'm going to actually pour into someone else. And that person is another guy by the name of Joshua. Joshua. In the Bible, you're going to see this multiple times. It's Joshua, son of Nun. It's the old Bible trivia question. What Bible character had no parents? It's Joshua, because he's the son of Nun. I'm sorry, that's a really bad old church joke. Joshua, son of Nun. And so we're going to see this, and I want to give you 4 principles from the life of Moses, and specifically the way that he worked with Joshua to give a legacy, that if we implement those in our lives, that we can be that person that actually starts passing off a legacy. Do you want to be that person? Okay, good. If you don't, you're selfish. Okay. Exodus chapter 24, verse 12 and 13. Moses has gone up the mountain. I'm sorry, this is not that one. Moses is getting ready to go up the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments. And it says, the Lord said to who? You got it on your screen. It says to who? To Moses. Nobody else. He wasn't talking to y'all. He's talking to Moses. He's not talking to me. He's talking to Moses. Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandments I have written for their instruction. Verse 13. Then Moses set out with Joshua. God didn't invite Joshua. God invited Moses. But Moses said, I don't want to have this encounter with God without somebody beside me. That I actually want somebody to be there with me. Then Moses set out with Joshua, his aide, and Moses went up the mountain of God. Number 1, if you're taking notes, legends isolate themselves. People of legacy involve others. People of legacy involve others. This is so important because some of us are introverted, and by our nature, we just want to do everything by ourselves. We just want to do it ourselves. I don't even want to be around people if I can help it. But people of legacy are actually going to involve others in the journey of life. They're going to bring somebody beside them wherever they're going. It's hard to do life alone and actually leave a legacy. You have to be with somebody that you're pouring into, that you're mentoring, that you're discipling. The Great Commission that many of you are familiar with says, go into all the world and preach the gospel. But the literal translation, if you were to see it, is as you are going into all the world, which doesn't make as much sense. But what he's saying here is you are going to be going places. You are going to be going to lunch today. You are going to go somewhere tonight. You are going to go to Walmart. You are going to go to the store. You're going to go to Target. You're going to go to the mall, wherever you're at. You are going to go to work tomorrow. And as you are going to places, disciple people everywhere you're going. In other words, take them beside you. This is this picture of what's happening right here with Moses and Joshua. Why? Because legacy is about intimacy. Legacy is about intimacy. And legends are created at a distance. But legacy is created in close relationship. Those are 2 very different things. You can love Joe Montana from a distance, and then you get up close to him and you go, I don't even know I really like this guy. What's the old phrase? Never meet your heroes. Why? Because some people look amazing from a distance, but you get up close to them and you're like, this guy's kind of a jerk. I'm not sure I really like this guy at all. Legacy has within its nature intimacy. That you're going to know the person, that you're going to be close with the person, that you're going to be close enough to sit and hear their stories. I grew up watching Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. He says it this way: there isn't anyone you couldn't learn from once you've heard their story. There's something about stories that capture you and pull you in. And it's the stories of who they are and what they've been through and how they've survived this and went through this and different things. And that creates this intimacy that actually passes off legacy. The pastors and I were on a pastor's retreat end of last year, like October, November, something like that. And our superintendent for the fellowship that we're a part of in this state, a guy by the name of Terry Rayburn, he spoke at one of our last fire nights. Terry Rayburn was there. We call him Super Terry because he's a superintendent, and he's super and he's Terry. And so why not put it Super Terry? So we call him Super Terry. So Super Terry came, and we had one of the most beautiful moments of ministry that I've ever been a part of. And what the difference was is most of the time when you have these kind of moments, somebody comes in and they preach. And they motivate you, or they challenge you, or they teach you, or they give you 5 steps to blah, blah, blah. This was radically different because I asked him to come in, and I said, I just want to know stories of when you wanted to quit and you kept going. I want to know stories of the hardships that you faced and how you walked through them. I want to know the stories of the mountaintops and the valleys low over the course of your 50-some-odd years of ministry now. I just want to know stories. And he sat with our pastors, and many of you, the pastors that are in the room, they were there. And he just sat, and he just told stories. And he's talking about when he was in one country as a missionary and a war broke out while he was there and there was no food, and how he prayed and God provided supernaturally for food, and how they were able to get out of that, and literally running through a gate, trying to get through a gate before they shut it to get all the missionaries out of the country because of what was happening in this country. And he tells stories about when he was working at a particular spot in ministry and he wanted to quit because he was so frustrated with what's going on, and he stopped his car on the side of the road and he has this come to Jesus moment. He's just so frustrated, and God's presence just shows up in his car and gives him this encouragement that he can go on. And there was nothing about it that was preacher-esque. There was no shouting. There was no, God said. There was none of that. I'm not even sure it was Pentecostal, y'all, because there was none of that. But it was just this moment of intimacy with this man who had gone before us. And I'm not exaggerating when I say by the time that ended, there were tears in every single one of your pastor's eyes at this church, because he was just investing. There was something about it that was legacy being passed off. It wasn't just that he's a hero of the faith, and he is. It's that he's passing off these stories. Stories are incredibly powerful. And not only that, but if you're going to become a person of legacy, you got to not only share stories of success, but stories of failure. Because you become a legend by sharing stories of your success, but you become a legacy person by sharing stories of failure. Because anybody can stand up and talk about how the great times were and how you met every challenge and how you've never quit and how you were so awesome. But the real story is a lot more complicated than that. Can I get an amen? Because the real story was, I didn't know if I was going to make it, and I didn't know if I was going to get through this or not, and I didn't know if I even wanted to get through this or not. And I was sick and tired of God and church and people and everything. And God came up in the middle of that, and I survived it. And the real stories are much more complicated. And the real stories are actually what pass off legacy. That vulnerability, that authenticity. One of the greatest things, grandparents, parents in this room, great-grandparents, one of the greatest things you can do is sit with your grandkids and just tell them your stories. They are craving it right now. And you might think, what is this story? It's nothing. They are craving it. I remember sitting and listening to stories of my best friend's grandfather who would tell these stories about World War II and what he encountered, and they crave it and they need it. That's legacy that's being passed off. And when you were so terrified, you didn't know if you could move forward, but you had to, and they need to hear these kind of stories. And it's powerful because it's not just the stories of success, it's the stories of failure. I was in Belgium a few years ago, and I was teaching at Continental Theological Seminary. It's like the Southeastern University of Europe. All the European students go there for seminary, the Assembly of God ones. And so I was teaching there at the school, and they had me in a classroom with a bunch of ministry students, and they're asking all these questions, and all the questions were positive in nature. Like, tell us the awesome things your church is doing. And tell them. So, I'm telling them stories of miracles and signs and wonders and prophetic things and church growth and baptisms and revival and all these great stories. And it was cool, but I started to catch on to this thing of like they're kind of creating me to be like a legend, like a hero, and I'm like, that's just not real. So then I flipped it, and I just kind of flipped the script on everybody asking questions, and I said, can I just turn this around? Let me tell you the stories of our failures. Because we've had some monumental failures in our church, if you don't know. And I don't mean like moral failures, the kind that you're like ashamed of. I mean, we like went for it, we swung and missed, right? Like we thought this thing would work and it didn't work, right? Anybody remember the biggest bonfire we ever had from a Christmas tree sale that cost us thousands of dollars? Like we have gone through some failures in our church, and now we sit back and we kind of laugh at them, but that's who we are as a church. We're going to fail because we're going to swing for the fences all the time. And so you're going to have these failures. That's part of the risk involved in our church. But I start switching it, and I'm telling these funny things that we did that at the time seemed smart. Now you look at it and go, who in the world were you thinking? You're an idiot, Pastor Brent, right? That's what you would say now. At the time, it seemed genius. And I start switching it, and you could watch as literally the demeanor in the room shifted. Instead of Brent and Arise Church being this like lifted up, exalted, ooh, look at them. Now it brought them back down to everybody's level, and they could actually learn something from us. Now it became a legacy moment of going, man, we're all in this together. And the trick is that you just got to keep trying. But failure is part of the process, and you need to fail. And it switched everything, right? There's something about it. If you're going to be a legacy person, you got to share the stories of not just success, but failure. If you're a grandparent, man, your grandkids need to hear the stories of the time you almost got divorced, that you didn't know if your marriage was going to make it, the times that you didn't know how you were going to pay the bills. They need to know that somebody has gone before them that has walked through the same things that they're in right now and made it through. They need to know that their failures are not final. They need to know that there's a next part of this road, and they might be at a roadblock right now and thinking, can I make it through it? And you on the other side going, I did, you can too. It's powerful. They need to hear your stories of failure, not just success. This is why Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:1, follow me or follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. That's legacy people. People of legacy are passing down their DNA. There's a difference. All of us have like a grandma who made like a certain food better than anybody else. Legends are the people who talk about grandma's cake. Legacy is when you're making grandma's cake from memory and remembering her in it. That you're not just talking about how amazing it was, you're actually participating in what she taught you to do. Grandma, teach your kids how to make cake. I want to eat it. The question here is, do you have people you're close enough to that you can pass down the legacy to, your legacy to? Are you close enough with them? Are you sharing life with them? Are you being vulnerable with them? I got to hurry. Let's go to number 2. Number 2, if you're taking notes, legends ignore, people of legacy confront. There's 2 accounts right here of Mo having an issue with Josh and calling him out on it. In the book of Exodus chapter 32, they're coming back down the mountain in verse 17 and 18, and the conversation ensues like this. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, there is the sound of war in the camp. Woo, this is great. Moses replied, it is not the sound of victory. It is the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear. He recognizes what's going on and that they've walked away from God, and he recognizes that Joshua does not. And he's confronting him in it. But that's one of them. The second one would be in Numbers chapter 11, verses 28 and 29. There were 2 different men who were prophesying the way that Moses would prophesy. And Joshua was going, who has the audacity to think they can prophesy like Moses can? And so Joshua, son of Nun, see, he didn't have any parents, who had been Moses' aide since youth, spoke up and said, Moses, my Lord, stop them. But Moses replied, are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets and that the Lord would put his spirit on them. By the way, that's a prophecy for us. But he said, I wish that all of them were able to prophesy. He's correcting him. He's rebuking him, not to be angry with him, not because he's upset with him, but because if you're going to be a person of legacy, you're going to have to confront the wrong ideas, the wrong thoughts that they have. Because people of legacy aren't afraid to confront someone's wrong perspectives, their wrong ideas. Recognize this, closeness allows for confrontation. You can't confront somebody that you're far from, not and have any real effect. That's one of the problems with America right now. We want to confront people that are way out there as if you have like you're going to make any difference in their life. But when you're close to somebody, you can get next to them and say, hey, why are you doing it this way? What's going on here? What's going through your mind here? Why are you worried about this thing you shouldn't be worried about? You can make it through this. You got this. You can confront the wrong ideas that they have. You got to have people in your life, both if you are a mentor and if you are the mentee, which we should all be both of those at some point or at the same point oftentimes. But you have to have people in your life that you give full permission to say anything they need to say. The people that are mentors in my life, they know, I've been very clear. If I am out of line, if they hear me preach something that's wrong, if they see me doing something wrong in my character, if they see me do something wrong with my wife or my family, if they see me, they have full permission to step up and speak into my life. Why? Because there's a closeness there. Because the intimacy has allowed that. And you can confront the wrong ideas that go on. There's a pastor down in South Florida, or he was, a guy by the name of Dan Betzer. He's a hero. He's probably raised more money for missions in the world missions than anybody else in human history. He is phenomenal. And I had the privilege of interviewing him years ago. Great, great, great man of God. But Dan, Pastor Dan, when he first went to his church in Fort Myers, where he's most known for, it was a horrible experience. People were hating on him. People were vandalizing his car. His wife's car was getting spit on and some stuff. They were vandalizing the church. There was just all kinds of things that he walked into, and he was just frustrated and bitter and just irritated. And God, why would you allow this to happen to me? Well, Dan Betzer's mentor, many of you will know this name if you know your church history, but it was a guy by the name of Leonard Ravenhill. A great revivalist, evangelist, author, written some of the most powerful, impactful books that you'll ever read, Leonard Ravenhill. And Leonard Ravenhill was one of Dan's mentors. And so Dan, in his despair, writes a letter to Leonard Ravenhill. And I'm going to read from Dan's book where he talks about it. He says, in my despair over what was happening in Fort Myers, I wrote to Leonard complaining about the car, the death threats, the window shootings, the spittle on Darlene's car, and all of the woes. I frankly wanted some sympathy from the man I admired so much. But instead, here's what he wrote back. Here's Leonard Ravenhill's response. Dear Dan, poor Dan. Quite possibly nobody in the history of Christianity has ever suffered as much as you have. Martha and I were just discussing you this morning at breakfast about what a privilege it is for us to know a martyr of your stature. Now, don't ever write a letter like that to me again. That's what a mentor can do. That's what a legacy person can do. Stop getting in your pity party. Stop feeling all how bad life is and how tough it is, how Jesus has abandoned you. A mentor, a legacy type person will confront those wrong ideas and pull people out rather than just step into it with them. I love that story. But the fact is, a legend person is often too worried about themselves to actually deal with the work of confronting somebody else. It's that great sin of man, that sin of passivity, the great first sin of not stepping up when you should have, that men oftentimes have, that you see constantly. Confrontations are beautiful and they show that you care if it's done in the right attitude. You need people to confront you, and you need to confront people. I know we live in a world where nobody wants their feelings hurt, but you need your feelings hurt if you're going to grow. By the way, this is part of my job as your pastor. If you come here for any length of time and I'm not hurting your feelings or stepping on your toes, that's the old church way of saying it. If I'm not like getting up in your business somehow and correcting you, then this probably isn't the church for you. Because you need a pastor who's going to get up in your business and tell you what's wrong and tell you what's right and get up. That's part of what it means. It needs to come in the right attitude and the right spirit. But that's part of what it means to be a pastor and a preacher of a church, that you're preaching the gospel, and the gospel is confrontational. That doesn't mean you're being rude or just being obnoxious, but the gospel is confrontational. Unless you think it's only you, I have to deal with it from the Holy Spirit before I ever bring it to you. So it always starts with me first. But the question there is, are you willing to confront those closest to you when they need a perspective change? If you're going to be a legacy person, you're going to be willing. Are you willing to confront them? It is your job, if you are going to be a legacy person, to confront lovingly, peacefully, gently, but confronting and guiding, often based on understanding their personalities and what they can handle. Number 3, if you're taking notes, legends have values. People of legacy impart their values. It's so powerful. Legends have values. They have these passions. They have these things they live for. People of legacy actually impart those to their followers. Exodus chapter 33, verse 11. We see this consistent account in the story of Moses where he would go into what was called the tent of meetings, and he would meet with God in that tent. It was his prayer room. It was his place that he would be with God. And it says the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Wow, how powerful is that? Then Moses would return to the camp. Why? Because he had work to do. But his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Why did he leave the tent? Because he ain't got to. Moses has got to do the job of leading. Joshua doesn't have to. And what I want you to see right here is this ability to impart passions. Moses loved the Lord. It was clear he was passionate about the Lord. He loved to be in the Lord's presence. And lo and behold, so did Joshua. Joshua was learning from Moses that God's presence was the most important thing, period. He was passing off his DNA to put God first in Joshua that was in Moses first before it was in Joshua. He was passing it off. So oftentimes we have the wrong interests now. We're more interested in passing on our values than passing on values than valuables. We're more interested in passing off what we've earned than what we've learned. The very fact is, Christianity is more caught than it is taught. There's other religions of the world. You can go to Islam or Hinduism, Buddhism, most of the other world religions. You are basically a Muslim because you are born in a Muslim family or a Muslim part of the world. You didn't choose to be a Muslim. You just were born into Islam. That's why it's frequently said that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. Well, that's only because every child is a new Muslim. That it's not because people are transferring and becoming a Muslim. It's because they're just born into it. Now, there are some people who do, but in general, it's because they're born into it. And this is so important because as a Christian, that's not the way it functions. You choose to follow Christ. So you have a child dedication with all these children, beautiful babies and children across this stage, and you are choosing to dedicate them before the Lord. But make no mistake, that does not make them a Christian, as Pastor Ken just said. It doesn't make them a Christian. No, it actually just says, I'm going to do my best to raise them as a Christian so that they'll love it. It's saying, I am going to be the Moses who is going into the tent of meetings so that my child, as they're coming up, will learn to love the tent of meetings. I'm going to be the one that brings them to church and makes it a positive experience so that my kids would just want to live at church. They would stay at church all the time if they could. They would just want to be here all the time. I'm going to be the one that they see pray when you're walking through a hard time so that when they walk through a hard time, they know how to pray. So you're actually leading by example. Why? Because Christianity is caught more than it's taught. You're going to catch it as you watch other people live it out. This is true, and especially important when we deal with child dedications and parents in this room that you want to raise your kids right. You cannot tell your kids what to do if you're not doing it. That'll only go so far. It is not do what I say, not what I do. You have to be living it out, and then you can declare it, and it'll have power at that point. And Joshua watched Moses enter the tent of meetings daily. He watched from a distance and eventually ends up in the tent himself. Do your kids see you praying? Do your kids see you reading the Bible? Do your kids see you making church and God a priority? Do they see you giving? Do they see these things? Because they're going to catch what they're seeing with their eyes. And that's what happens with a legacy person. They're catching it. They're catching those values. They're catching those ideas, those passions that you have. Not that they have to be exactly like you, but you are delivering something to them through your passions. Which leads to this question: what are people catching from you? What are people catching from you? Say it this way: if you couldn't speak, what would your life say is important about you? What are people catching from you? What are your real values? What are your real passions that you're planting into someone else? You're putting a DNA into someone else because of the way you're living. You see it with Joshua and Moses. We need to see it with us and our children and us and the people that we mentor and love on. And then the last one, number 4, legends die. People of legacy live on through others. Legends die, but people of legacy don't die. They live on. This is why you're making grandma's cake now. You're still talking about her, but you're doing the things she did. It's not just talking about her, it's doing what she did. Deuteronomy chapter 34 ends the book of Deuteronomy. That chapter does. And as Deuteronomy comes to a close, you get the end of Moses' life and his death and how he handled that death. And in verse 9 of Deuteronomy 34, you see the transition happen. And it says this: Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom. Don't miss this. Because Moses had laid his hands on him. Now, there was a moment at the end of Moses' life where he is laying his hands on him and imparting something to him. Not unlike what we just did with Prothios. Not unlike if we send somebody out on a trip that we do that. We do that still to this day. There is that moment. But make no mistake, this is not just about that moment. This is Moses, day after day, week after week, year after year, putting his hands on young Joshua and raising up Joshua to become the next Moses-type figure. Purposely saying, I'm not going to be a legend that when I die, it's all done with me and people just wish I were still alive. People just want to follow Moses. I'm going to invest in someone else. I'm going to pour a legacy into someone else so that all this can keep going. I'm laying my hands on them. And that's what happens. People of legacy live their lives by placing their hands on somebody else. It's like making a sculpture. It's like putting something together that's broken, and you're piecing it together, putting your hands on it day after day to help it become all that it could possibly become. That's what legacy people do. That's what we do. That's what we do. Let's turn it around and put it in the Christian context real fast. If we just talked about Jesus's exploits, the way that he raised the dead, the way that he healed the sick, the way that he fed the 5,000, the way that he healed the woman with the issue of blood, the way that he stood on a mountaintop with Moses and Elijah, the way that he did these different things, if we only talked about his exploits, he would be legendary. But Jesus took 12, lost one, put his hands all over them, laid hands on them, so to speak, said, follow me, created an intimacy with them, and said, follow me, and started investing in them. So that then when Jesus ascends into heaven, the legacy doesn't come through Jesus, it comes through the disciples. That now these disciples go out and start spreading the gospel. Now a few become hundreds. Now hundreds become thousands. Now thousands become hundreds of thousands. And before you know it, you get into a world like we are today, and you have people all the way, a long way from Israel, in Brandon, Florida, listening to a message, who are still people that both ministers have their hands on you, and the Holy Spirit, through God himself, has his hands on you, and he's shaping you because you are the legacy of Christ. You are the one that God is shaping you and forming you into the image of his Son, to be God's holy masterpiece, that he's shaping you and forming you because you are the legacy of what was started almost 2,000 years ago in the Middle East. You are that legacy. Because the true measure of success is succession. Is it going to end with you? And my fear is too many times we get so caught up in becoming a legend. And I know you wouldn't have used that terminology before today probably, but we get so caught up in building this castle of our own, having the right accolade, doing the right thing, and climbing the right ladder of success, and doing all these things which are not inherently wrong. But we'll end up dying, and we haven't actually left anything true and meaningful to the generation coming behind us. You raised some money, you might have left them some money. You might have left them a house, but did you leave them values? Did you leave them the ability to pray when times got hard? Did you leave them something that's more valuable than just the stuff we can buy and sell? I believe God is calling us to be people of legacy, which means all of my life becomes not just about me, but about others. That I stop trying to make myself into a great trophy, and I start trying to teach others how to win their trophy. I go from the player to the coach. Would you stand up with me around the room? What we leave behind matters. So that great question that we started with and that we wrap up the whole Creator series with. How will I be remembered? If I had longer to preach this, I would talk about planning your own funeral, because you should be doing that. If you want people to cry at your funeral, then you better be living so that they miss you now. But who are you laying hands on? Who are you putting your hands on? Who are you purposely mentoring? For some, it might be dozens. For others, it might be one. It doesn't matter how many. That's not the point. The point is that you're passing off something that's bigger than just your exploits. You're passing off something that'll change them forever. And so years from now, they're not just talking about how good your cakes were that you made. They're making those cakes as they talk about it. Years from now, they're just not talking about how, Pastor Ada would pray for hours. No, they're praying as they talk about it. That's the difference. How will you be remembered? Are you leaving a legacy or becoming a legend? Which one are you doing? Which one are you doing? So we're going to transition here in a second, but just before we do, there might be some of you and you don't know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And today is your moment to surrender to him. It's the start of your legacy in a spiritual sense of what's being passed on to you that started in Jesus and has gone all the way to this day today. And so would you just bow your heads with me for just a second? I'm not going to call you out or embarrass you, but if you're in this room and you say, Pastor, I need to give my life to Jesus, I want to give you an opportunity to do that, and I want to pray over you. And so if that's you, would you just stick your hand up and wave it at me? Say, Pastor, I want to give my life to Jesus. I want to give my life to the Lord. Amen. Amen.
God is doing so much here at Arise Church, and we want you to be a part of it. Stay connected with us on our YouTube channel, Facebook, and Instagram, and wherever you can find us online at My Arise Church, and we'll see you next week.